Thanks very much. Thank you, Adam, for this opportunity, and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. All right, so I want to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and that's innovation and patents. So let's dive right in. A bit about me as it pertains to this subject. I started off my career a long time ago studying computer engineering. From there, I joined IBM, and this is where I really got a flavor for innovation. IBM was at the top of the patent table for a very long time because, first of all, they had a lot of processes that allowed them to recognize, nurture, and ultimately monetize innovation. So I had the opportunity to work on interesting projects, learn from great mentors, and I filed my first couple of patents at IBM. From there, I went off, I did my MBA, and I came back to Canada, and I joined Capital One. This is where I got into product management, and product managers have an advantage. We get first crack at a lot of really interesting problems. So when I was working as a product manager, I had an interesting idea, and I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I patent this? I knew a little bit from my early days, and I never really found how to get it done until I met a lawyer in my office, and we started the Capital One Patent Committee. So we would actually go around, we would do workshops, we would help people to think about what part of their day could be patentable. And when people had ideas, we would help them go through that patent process. So a lot of what I learned through that experience, I try to distill down and bring to you here today. After Capital One, I moved into the startup world. I think in my career, I've authored 11 patents for 4 different companies. And right now I'm at a really interesting company I joined only a few weeks ago called Informal Systems. By all means, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll tell you a lot more. So the reason that I wanted to talk about innovation, at this time in this market was I think it's really pertinent. We are maybe not in a recession, depends on who you talk to, but we are definitely in a cost-cutting mode. And one of the first things that gets cut in these types of environments is R&D, which makes it really challenging to innovate. And I'm sure we can all agree that innovation is important for any company. So how do we on the front lines, product managers, designers, developers, how can we drive that innovation from the bottom up in the hopes of staying competitive? And over the next 15 minutes, I hope I'm going to be able to convince you of that. The other big topic that even came up a few minutes ago is AI. The likes of ChatGPT, Midjourney, all the other large language models is really opening up some interesting areas for innovation. And I think that this is a reminder that we need to keep innovating. So to that end, I distilled my thoughts into 6 easy steps for grassroots innovation. Keep in mind, this still requires an organizational initiative to keep that going, but that's probably for a separate talk. All right, so step number 1, frame the problem. I think a lot of companies think, okay, we get a bunch of smart people in the room, tell them to innovate, and they're going to come up with a bunch of great ideas. In actuality, you need to do product properly in this instant. You need to go out there and you need to find a problem with business value. You need to make sure the company cares about it. That's going to drive the company mission. Once you have that, define the problem, write it down. Once you've written it down, align on it with a small group of people. And I say small, you don't want 8 or 9 people trying to all jam in a room and find a great idea. I find it's much better to have 3 or 4 dedicated people. One of the worst things you can do is, have a top level exec or a VP come in and say, okay, well, I want to be involved, but I only have like half an hour here or there. And they just sort of parachute in and spout a bunch of ideas. That can also actually be detrimental because what's going to happen is people are going to say, well, the VP said this, so we're just going to do it. We're not going to try to think of anything interesting. Once you have that small team, do product, go do your homework, talk to customers, look at the competitors, really understand the landscape that you're trying to operate in. Okay, so once you've done that, cross-pollinate and ruminate. 2 fun words to say, but what does that all mean? Let's say you've got a team, you agree on the problem you're going to solve. Don't dive right in and start trying to solution. Don't try to start thinking of ideas. Go away. Think about it for a couple of days. and tell people to go and talk to others outside of their industry. If your spouse is a mechanic or a vet, describe the problem to them. See if there are comparables from their line of work that might be applicable. It's a great example that I kind of dawned on me a little while ago. So about 10, 12 years ago, Pokemon Go was all the rage. People were on their phones, wandering through cities, trying to find rare or interesting Pokemon. And I thought, wow, whoever did this must have had the most eureka moment to come up with this idea. And a couple of years ago, my mother-in-law got really into birding. And I realized it must have been the inspiration. I can't guarantee that the creators of Pokemon Go did or didn't have a great aunt that got into birding, but these are people that will drive halfway across the country, wake up at 4 a.m., and go out in the middle of nowhere to see one particular bird or take a picture of one bird. So, I think there's got to be some inspiration there. And, that's that kind of spark. And there are countless examples. Those Dyson vacuum cleaners were inspired by the cyclone technology used in sawmills. The printing press was inspired by the grape press used to make wine. And probably all know the story of the first Nike running shoe that was made using a waffle iron. So that ability to cross between different industries and pull ideas, pull inspirations is super powerful. The third one, really simple, but it's take a walk. Stanford research has shown that when you're moving, the creative part of your brain works better. My favorite time to innovate is when I'm out for a run in the evenings. So yeah, go take a walk, especially, when it's nice outside and not too smoky. All right, so you've done all your homework, you've got your team assembled, you've gone away. How do you get in the room and really start to think about some of these problems? Well, first of all, get people to come back with a couple of ideas. Come to the meeting with 5 interesting ideas or 5 bad ideas. Just to kickstart that innovation process. The other area to look at is look at trade-offs. Lewis had an interesting example, right? If you're trying to improve the cutting edge in every possible way, it's going to be really hard. But what if you focus on that 70-year-old? What if you find a particular way to trade off cost for quality? These are, areas that are rife for innovation. And I think if you can facilitate people to think about that when they're trying to come up with solutions, you're going to have a lot more success. Okay, so I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but let's say you've got in the room, your team has come up with an amazing idea. The worst thing that can happen is it doesn't go anywhere. You really want to make sure that you have a path forward, that you can get leadership interested enough to move it forward. The thing that kills me is when companies spend huge amounts of time and money on hackathons. They got all these smart people in a room to think about problems and come up with interesting solutions, and they don't go anywhere. They sort of have a little show and tell at the end, and then everyone just goes back to their jobs. I think if you really want to be serious about innovation, and this speaks more to that organizational part of it, you really want to have a path forward. And whether that's a patent, whether that's designing a new product, it can be whatever, but try to think about that as you're developing. My last piece of wisdom from my time helping others kind of innovate is don't be afraid to fail. Innovation is just naturally hard to do. It's, even if you go through all the right steps, there's no guarantee you're going to come out at the other end with something that is groundbreaking, that is innovative. So if you don't get it the first time, just keep trying, keep at it. So I've got, I think, a few more minutes here, and I want to talk a bit about patents. This is something that always comes up because, let's be honest, who doesn't want to be an inventor? But the world of patents can be a little bit daunting, and I think that over a couple of slides, I can hopefully dispel some misinformation and fear. All right, so what is a patent? In its simplest terms, it's kind of like a government imposed monopoly that you get for a certain amount of time. Government is basically saying you have right over this invention. Now, there are 3 different types of patents. The one that we all mostly know and love are utility patents, which are just product, process, or machine. There's also design patents. So if you're inventing the next Coke bottle, or you've got this amazing UI interface that's super inclusive, that might be a design patent. Lastly, you have plant patents. unless you're in agriculture or pharma, you probably don't know anything about plant patents. I sure don't. But to give you a bit of context, in 2020, there were just shy of 600,000 utility patents to the United States Patent Office, a little under 50,000 design patents, and just shy of 1,000 plant patents. So the bulk of these are mostly utility patents. So what makes something patentable? And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. I mean, there's really three criteria. The first is it novel? So is it, obviously unique from anything else that has been created? And some caveats here that it doesn't have to be completely unique. You can find something that is, mundane or ordinary, but if you can find a way to innovate on top of it, that is patentable. Alternatively, if you can find something that exists already and find a new use for it, again, that's patentable. Second of all, it has to be useful. This bar is a little bit lower, but put it this way, a patent from beginning to end could cost you $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to get. So at the very least, you probably want it to have some usefulness, or it may not be worth your time and effort. The last criteria is probably the most difficult. It has to be non-obvious. The way this is usually termed is an expert in the field will recognize it as genuinely creative. My own colleague used to say it has to have a bit of a spark of creativity to it. And this is, something that is challenging for people who have done patents time and again, but usually you need a little bit of counsel on this to get it right the first time. Okay, so now that you sort of understand what a patent is, what are some of the pitfalls? Biggest pitfall is people thinking too big. I mentioned earlier, there were about 600,000 patent applications a few years ago. Not all of those can be the light bulb or Google PageRank. Things that are niche but useful are still very much worthwhile for companies to patent. On the flip side, sometimes thinking too small. If it's too niche or too narrow, or just, you'll never get enough value out of it, probably doesn't make sense. The last pitfall that I see is people thinking they actually need to write a patent. If you've ever read one, those are crazy, crazy documents written by lawyers for lawyers. Really, all you need to do is to describe it to a lawyer someday, if you ever want to write a patent. So why should you want to patent things? Well, the way I like to describe this is a patent can be one of three things. It could be a sword, a shield, or a gold coin. A sword is very much, if someone goes out and infringes on your patent, they use your idea, you have recourse. You can say, nope, you can't do that. You can have them pay royalties. It's a mechanism to protect your invention. I'm not advocating people go out and become patent trolls, but if you have generally gone out and spent the time and effort to come up with something that is innovative, you go through the process to patent it, you should have that exclusivity. The second piece is the shield. One of the worst things I think that could happen is if you come out with a really interesting idea, someone else recognizes that, goes and patents it, and then tells you to stop using it. It's the last thing you want to happen. So if you patent something, no one's going to tell you not to use it. And lastly, it can be a gold coin. Patents are valuable assets. They can be bought and sold, traded. To give you some context, 11 years ago, Nortel went out of business. Their portfolios sold for $4.5 billion, billion with a B. There are a lot in there, but you can see how lucrative this can be. All right, the last quick topic I have is provisional patents. This is kind of a niche area that not a lot of people know about, but it's incredibly valuable. So a provisional patent is sort of like a patent light. You file a provisional patent, and then you have this 12-month window in order to decide if you want to file a full patent or not, which, as I mentioned, costs you $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. So this is a great time to explore the market, test if it actually makes sense. But the nice part is, in this window, you can still use the term patent pending, which, I don't know if there's any marketers on the call, but they love that word. And also, it's incredibly cheap and easy. You write a couple of page document, you pay about $300 in issuance fees to the government, and you can file a provisional patent. It doesn't require a lawyer, not until you get to that second step. So there's a lot of potential here to test the waters. overall, I think patents are not the only endpoint for innovation, but they can be a really powerful endpoint. And I hope that if you have a great idea, you would consider this as part of your company's patent strategy. That's all I have for today. Happy to take any questions.